Video game clones have been around since the very beginning of gaming. From the endless home versions of Pong to the shameless attempts to replicate Mario, the entire industry has always had a nasty case of, you made this? No, I made this. While the more extreme cases of cloning dip closer to plagiarism, in the modern era, a lot of gaming concepts are now part of a basic lexicon that's gotten so homogenized it's hard for a truly new concept to become the standard. Every FPS for what felt like a very long time was a rip on Call of Duty or Halo, with varying amounts of bloom, and mainstream gaming kind of revolved around this. That was until 2017, when two games completely changed the mainstream landscape, for better or worse. Fortnite and The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. This ain't a joke, by the way. Sure, Fortnite is just a colorful kid-friend version of PUBG, which is a take on DayZ Battle Royale, which is a take on the Japanese film Battle Royale, but Breath of the Wild not only reinvented Zelda, but essentially saved Nintendo from the Wii U. Now, regardless of my opinion on Breath of the Wild, which, being a huge fan of games like Just Cause, isn't great, for me it's not, it had a massive effect on video games coming out recently. When Zelda embraced the open world format, they did it in a way that minimized the need for cutting-edge graphics, slapped on a light and flowery color palette, and put an emphasis on minimalistic sandbox exploration. Besides something like Fortnite or New Doom, Breath of the Wild is one of the most easily recognizable looking games of the last generation. There's nothing like it. Well, at least until 2020, aka the year all those Breath of the Wild clones finished being developed. So here's what I'm looking for. Number one, similar gameplay mechanics. Stamina-based mountain climbing. Gee, I wonder where that came from. The Yukon Trail? Nah. Number two, similar art styles. The type of games that go, maybe we can grab the Breath of the Wild fan base, but with our game. The cel-shaded look without cells, you know the deal. And lastly, the modern Zelda feeling. 3D action platformers aren't uncommon, but the dungeon crawling, element exploiting, puzzle-filled Zelda-style games are so specific, it's unmistakable.
So yo, it's Austin, and we finally have enough Breath of the Wild clones to talk about. Yay! But first, this video has been brought to you by today's sponsor, Romancing Saga Re-Universe.
Romancing Saga Re-Universe is a new free-to-play mobile game by Square Enix that takes place in the Romancing Saga world. If you're anything like me and love old-school JRPGs, Re-Universe has been ticking a lot of boxes. I played a lot of the Saga games growing up, and I was surprised to see how much nostalgia I had for the series. And this game has all of the warriors, like my boy Julian from 3. This new world has its own original story, and it's topped with my boy Kenji Ito's original beautiful soundtracks. The aesthetic overall captures that exact feeling it needs. It's got RPG systems, both casual and deep enough for a variety of players, and if you flick up the difficulty, some of the battles can be pretty challenging. It's the half anniversary right now, so it's the perfect time to get started. There's tons of login bonuses and jewels being given away, so you too can get strong characters to level up right off the bat, make it through the story, and smash the gacha machine, literally kicking the living crap out of it. So if you're into that old school JRPG style game and want to check out a new game in a classic series, click the link down in the description to download Saga Re-Universe from the App Store or Google Play today.
Alrighty, let's get together and start exploring huge, open, massive worlds together with our very first game of the day, Craftopia.
This is one of those games where you're looking at the store page and it's like, this is sus. Where have I seen this blue before? Is this Zelda or Satisfactory? Never mind the assembly line of death over here, but you boot this thing up for 2 seconds and see the main menu and it's like, oh, I see. Craftopia is an early access, by the way, as it makes sure to let you know at the bottom left of the screen at all times. So yeah, I'm not gonna be too hard on it. First things first, I create a new character and there's an old man face for some reason, one that makes me look 4,000. So of course we're gonna roll with that. And we're looking at a red button? Is this supposed to be a statement? This Wildstar-looking character with hooves let us know that I, Austin Eruption, definitely destroyed the Earth, as I find out how to get my character out of a cutscene and leave in the middle of the plot explanation. Not before doing this. But you know, early access, it's fine. So in Craftopia, your goal is to rebuild the world, the typical survival game thing where you punch rocks to make sticks, to cut trees, to make a house, to make a cannon, to shoot you into the sky. But not before punching the tutorial NPCs and watching them drown themselves. Well, that's grim. Now, survival and crafting games are a dime a dozen, but this is definitely the first one I've seen fully take the Breath of the Wild aesthetic and just slap it over everything. From some of the minimalistic UI elements to a stamina bar, all the way to the freaking glider. For real though, the second I see a person hanging off one of these, it's a Breath of the Wild clone. Like, come on. This is essentially Ark or Satisfactory with a Breath of the Wild skin on top of it, and well, it's not the worst thing in the world. Though I will say this game has one heck of an identity crisis where it's not really sure what it wants to be. There's a list of goals on the side of the UI taking up a whole fourth of the screen, saying things like destroy 100 rocks, destroy 200 rocks. It just, you know. There's a ton of crafting, but there's also a ton of combat options, most of them extremely janky. Though rather than relying on puzzle-infused shrines, Craftopia goes full Diablo for some reason, with some of these scary dungeons that you make your way up to named really daunting and lore-infused things such as Dungeon of Island. Yeah, why am I so small? I'm so small. What? Eventually, you get to go to other islands where there's different types of environments, enemies, loot, and various other things to be found. So you're essentially getting resources to keep building up the prog list until you have the best stuff in the game and can presumably go out and hunt giant monsters with friends. Though, good luck for me finding anyone to play this with. I think Craftopia has the potential to be something cool, even if it's at its roots a Breath of the Wild clone plus Ark. I think if they tighten up a lot of aspects and make the game feel like less of a mod and more of its own thing, it could be fairly decent. Just to try to find someone to play it with, as these survival crafting games have always been best with friends, ones who won't judge your sense of fashion.
Let's move on to something a little more well-known. Genshin Impact released earlier this year. It's been making all kinds of waves, and it does not show any signs of slowing down. The end is nigh.
Genshin Impact. The game that was initially met with a plethora of Chinese Nintendo fans giving it the bird while holding up Switches. The game made by a developer who have gone on record stating that their business model targets those wanting to, quote, pay for love with the waifus, but also one heck of a free-to-play game. Genshin is as one-to-one with Breath of the Wild as it gets, from the way the controls feel, to the way the UI looks, to the way the elements interact with the environment. Got a little fire, it's gonna spread, especially if you hit it with a tornado. Not quite on the Final Fantasy 15 level, but still. So you pick one of two main characters and embark on a journey in the world of Teyvat, a mix of Hyrule and the four nations of Avatar: The Last Airbender. Once you get set up in the world, you're then told like, hey, go do things, go collect chests, go look for dungeons, go enjoy our story at your own pace. Despite the fact that this is also being developed as a potential mobile video game, it certainly does not feel like one in the beginning. At least the beginning, keep that in mind. You unlock a few characters in the story like Amber or Lisa, all of which have completely different movesets and even character stories you can access to flesh out their personalities. Everyone has their faves, some anime waifu or husbando they're screaming about. I just kinda like Xinyan. She's got a guitar, that's pretty cool. But this is a free-to-play game, and beyond those initial few given to you for free, most of the characters are then acquired by, you guessed it, gacha. And one that is particularly harsh. You ever do a full-ass 10 pull and just get a subpar weapon? It's like I'm looking at nothing. All of the many characters are all a part of the gameplay, and some even have roles in the story too, some less than others, but they all exist in Teyvat. So you have your starting dude, and you get to roll around with a party of 4 at all times. Rather than losing weapon durability and switching out what you're holding, Genshin wants you to combine and rotate the cooldowns of the 4 dudes you're rolling with. Elemental abilities join together to do more ridiculous attacks, such as creating a fire tornado or soaking someone before shocking them. You also have basic combo attacks and a stamina-based dash for dodging enemies. Honestly, playing this game just feels good. At least for the first 10 hours, then the wall hits, and it hits hard. Despite being a game that wants to be minimalistic, free-feeling, and give the player a ton of control over what they're doing, Genshin Impact has some extremely intrusive paywall gating around 12 hours in. You can barely feel it for those first few hours. You can see the gacha elements as background stuff, but it becomes evident that you need it to progress. Suddenly, enemy XP becomes meaningless, and you need to rely on consumable items that arbitrarily grant thousands of it. Then you need to find certain items in order to ascend that character character to the next step, which is basically just unlocking their level cap. If you don't want to get absolutely destroyed, you're going to need these items, especially because the world level keeps increasing, so you have to keep it up. Sometimes they're available in an in-game store, sometimes they're only available on Tuesdays. You have an adventurer level that gates not just content, but areas of the world. So if you're like me and you just enjoy playing the living crap out of a game, Genshin will not allow you to do that. You gotta wait for dailies to reset, to get XP, to raise that adventurer level, to unlock a quest, to unlock another map, and that's gonna happen more and more the deeper you get in. Combine that with harsh gacha rates that gate various gameplay styles behind a paywall, and I'm sitting here 20 some odd hours into the game wishing I could have paid $60 for something normal. But instead I just gotta sit here and be upset that I keep getting all these small baby children when all I wanna do is play as Beto. Please, I beg you. But the first few hours have an element of mystery that rivals Breath of the Wild in its grandness. And the anime-ness isn't even over the top or fan servicey. Well, at least not in the story. Physics say otherwise. Considering this game's already generated a metric frick ton of money though, I'm assuming no one feels the same way I do. Genshin Impact, also known as Anime Breath of the Wild. Ambitious for a mobile game, but could have been a 9 out of 10 if it was, you know, normal.
So what about Windbound? This was a Breath of the Wild clone that came out earlier this year, back in August, and it is something that you can actually purchase, so let's see how that stacks up.
Breath of the Wild was considered a departure from the normal formula and something that took a more unconventional approach to game design, so it would make sense that we would see a bunch of indies getting inspired by it. You've got the early access and random Steam games that fill the void, but Windbound was probably the first time I saw a game that made me double take. Was this a sequel? Was this Breath of the Wild on the sea? No, this has decent frame rate. In Windbound, you're controlling a girl named Kara who gets stuck on the ocean during a crazy storm where she's presumably knocked into the water by a giant Cthulhu-looking beast. From there, you wake up on an island with only a knife and a crafting system. The goal? Simple. You gotta travel across the ocean to activate these giant towers that will unlock the Prog Door. You'll find sticks and rocks and meat, and you can create tools and boats and weapons and like more boat stuff. Also this thing. Remember me? Windbound really takes that Breath of the Wild aesthetic and exploration-based gameplay and smashes it together with a survival game and Wind Waker, my favorite 3D Zelda. There's a large emphasis on hunting for food in order to keep your stamina and health up, a system I have mixed feelings on. In something like the Forest or Ark, it tends to work well as it's a central part of the gameplay. But in Windbound, a game that seems to want you to take your time exploring, you run out of stamina a little too fast. Each island has limited resources and you have a very limited carrying capacity at the beginning. You'd think you could stock up on food and be good to go, but the food you cook actually spoils over time, so it feels like you're being rushed. Once you activate all the beacons, you're taken to a transition screen where Windbound reveals itself to have roguelite elements. There's this survivalist difficulty where when you die, you lose everything but a line of items and some passive stat increases, and you get yoinked back to chapter 1. And that sucks. This game is more slow burn than something like Enter the Gungeon or Binding of Isaac, so it feels like you lose a lot. I played on Storyteller so I could just play through the game, and I'm glad I did too, because at some point I made myself this awesome boat that was going so fast before this super shark was ridiculously fast and ruined my day. I don't think the engine was meant to handle this. Oh, why is he so fast? Well, I'm not at chapter 1, but I did just lose everything. Oh, my poor boat. Overall, Sailing the Seas is fun and well made, but just about everything else is extremely lacking. The combat system is really, really slow and frustrating. The bow feels decent enough, but not only do we have a cursed weapon breaking system, attempting to merely attack any target feels incredibly stiff. Genshin Impact, this is definitely not. The main difference there, though, is that Windbound was made by an extremely small team, so there's a lot I can look past. It doesn't feel shameless, which is the important part, but also doesn't feel very good to play either. It's a hybrid Breath of the Wild Wind Waker Raft combination, and while ambitious in a lot of aspects, some things just need a little more time in the oven. Also, there's no proper storytelling or central narrative, so I'm just gonna assume this is the bad ending of Sharknado. But what about a game like Oceanhorn 2? If Windbound takes a lot of elements from Wind Waker, then Oceanhorn 2 Knights of the Lost Realm feels like it could fit nicely over in the Skyward Sword area. The original Oceanhorn has been been brought up as one of the most obvious Zelda clones or knockoffs of the last 10 years, but like, how could it not? It's decent in its own right and could have easily passed off as a portable entry in the series. The sequel was announced a few years ago, and immediately everyone was like, oh yeah, looking familiar there, ain't ya, bud? But this is an Apple Arcade game, so if you look at it as a way to play something like 3D Zelda on a mobile device, it's pretty impressive. On the Switch though, where its big boy competition Breath of the Wild actually exists, it's a lot less so.
By the way, this game is more normal 3D Zelda than Breath of the Wild, but it looks really similar, and I wanted another game for this video, so let's call it a bonus.
Look, this guy literally has a reverse Triforce on his head. Gee, I wonder what that means. This is a pretty standard Zelda adventure. You start as an unnamed hero who becomes an important part of the world's destiny, and it froze. Hard froze, 15 minutes into the recording. Nintendo Switch, come on. This game does not like frame rate. Oceanhorn 2 wants to be this big and grand adventure, but the console literally cannot handle it without dropping into the teens of frames. So you meet a bunch of characters like Gen, Trin, and Mayfair who actually accompany the hero through the world and dungeons, which is actually a neat addition. I'm not used to having a party while also figuring out how to light doors on fire. Or they can do it. It just might be hard to figure out how. You unlock the standard bag of Zelda tricks, including bombs and hook shots, but Oceanhorn's main hook is the equipable crystal system to put stat upgrades onto those items. You can buy them or find them in chests in the world. There are moments when this game actually shines at emulating the 3D Zelda experience, but it just falls apart in the technical side of things. You can really tell that this is being held back by being a mobile game. Treasure chest animation? It's okay. You can still attack me. I'm fine. Boss fight? Why don't I just shoot him from a distance and call it a day? I like that Oceanhorn 2 spends time developing a party of likable characters to follow you around, and this world is really neat to explore, even if it's very Star Wars or Final Fantasy XII. But in terms of a fun factor, I would say the original has a little more going for it. Number one, Nobuo Uematsu and Kenji Ito on the soundtrack. Like, you can't beat that.
Things are still pretty slim pickings for Breath of the Wild clones in 2020, but I wanted to save the most obvious, blatant, and shameless clone for last, Immortals FENYX Rising. Also, I'm still upset that these games are on the wrong side of the case. And why is Sonic in there?
Ah, yes. The game that allegedly had to change its original name, Gods and Monsters, because of a lawsuit from Monster Energy Drink. Oh, America, the land of the free. Let's get this out of the way. Ubisoft, the corporation, I don't really like how they're trying to sweep all of the many scandals and harassment allegations under the rug with video games and trailers and half-assed non-apologies. But they did in fact make a Breath of the Wild clone, so we're gonna be talking about it today. And when I say clone, I mean cologne. Here's a montage. Yeah, it's pretty extremely blatant where the inspirations were, but unlike a majority of the games in this video, Immortals has a budget, it has some AAA polish, and it doesn't literally put Link's glider into the game. You did it. So FENYX Rising, they should have called this Rising Phoenix by the way, is all about Greek mythology. And we've got a stacked crew, there's tons of gods and monsters represented here, from Zeus and Prometheus to Typhon, Achilles, Heracles, and my himbo son Hermes. You play as FENYX, a mortal who serves as Prometheus's racehorse in a bet to get himself freed from Zeus. If you're familiar with Greek mythology, as you can imagine, the two argue about the logistics of everything happening with a sense of humor that I wasn't expecting.
Had they too been transformed? FENYX couldn't help but... A huge monster appears. It's ginormous, but FENYX just laughed. No!
Perfect.
Cringe? Sometimes. And then they'll get me with a meta joke, and I'll be sitting there mad that it made me laugh. Once you break out of the intro island, you're given that Breath of the Wild moment. You get wings. This game's equivalent to Link's glider and literally fly down to the big open world, but with a little more direction. Rather than making the player manually mark locations from the giant Ubisoft towers, you get to find them through a first-person looking glass and have it perma-marked on your map. Some of these things include currency to improve your stats, chests, puzzles, and one of the many hidden vaults, which are totally not shrines. Nope, it's different. I mean, I could talk about these and how they've got a good variety of challenge and uniqueness to them, but like, it's pretty shameless how this is exactly shrines from Zelda. I'm almost surprised that there weren't pieces of heart. In a lot of ways, Immortals takes a lot of its gameplay from the new modern Assassin's Creeds and combines it with Zelda elements. The combat system has a fast and combo-heavy feeling that Assassin's Creed has, but movement along the map is very close to Breath. Climbing, it's the same. Gliding, it's the same. Open world puzzles, you know it's here. If you were to take away every aesthetic piece of both games and present them side to side as just stick figures, Immortals would simply be Breath of the Wild with some modern quality of life improvements. And that's actually a good thing. One of my issues with Breath was how limited mobility is for a majority of that game. Immortals, by comparison, is dense. There's tons of collectibles and puzzles and stuff packed in everywhere, so that Ubi checklist of things to do feels slightly more satisfying to me, but like in a filling out a spreadsheet kind of manner. Do you like text documents? This is your game.
But all of this isn't without faults. I had Immortals freeze on me quite a bit. I'm not sure if it's the Series X version that I have, but I had a lot of hard freezes happen, causing me to lose several hours of data. So yeah.
I had 2 instances of autosave not working and the game freezing during a manual save that caused me to lose not 1 or 2, but like 3 hours of gameplay. So that sucked. Imagine in Breath of the Wild, a game about taking your time exploring and uncovering secrets of the world, having to manually mark everything, only to lose an entire 3 hours of progress. Thankfully, I just ran in a different direction and was able to experience new stuff, which to me shows that Immortals has a ton of different approaches to it, but I'll never forget. Not even for a second. Eventually you get so many upgrades and god powers in Immortals that you feel like a total badass who isn't bound to gravity. Combat gets a lot easier and, you know, you're just kind of like half a god, I guess. Yeah, it's a shameless take on Breath of the Wild, and it has a development timeline clearly dating it to being obviously a clone, but it's a really good one. It's easily the best non-free-to-play game in this video, and in my eyes, a solid take on the formula that is definitely going to be blown out of the water in the next few years. But hey, I like it. I'll probably finish it, mostly because it's not going to take luck. Even though this single-player game has microtransactions, why did you guys do this?
If Majora's Mask is anything to look at in terms of Nintendo performing an asset flip, I think Breath of the Wild 2 could be really freaking good, but until then, you can check out Immortals or one of the games in this video or one of the clones that are coming our way in the near future. But that's all for today. Join me next time when we take an annual look at the worst games of the year. This year sucked.
Special Patreon shout out to Ryan Talbert, Legend Gary, Kieran Arter, Kevin Zanowski, Jordy McCaffrey, Jacoby Fitzpatrick, Jay Roos, Flaming Fighter, Eli Shane Staufenecker, David Molnar, DX Buster, Donald Dowdy, D.A. Stevens, Christopher Olivia, Chris Shelton, and Brandon Howe. Thank you very much for the generous support. Merry Christmas Part 2. We got one more video coming before Christmas itself, and then I have possibly another one before the year ends, maybe even one on Christmas. It depends on how much stuff I can get done. But thank you all so much for the support. It really, really means the world to me. And I'm glad we finally had enough Breath of the Wild clones to make one of these things. Video games, yay.